Hello, team. All right, so we're going to start with our AP psychology notes. Yay, very exciting. We're going to learn some stuff. Also, I'm a nerd and I'm totally okay with it. All right, so I want to be super, super clear for class. This is an AP class. It is notes heavy. We're going to have notes almost every single day. So whether you're in the room or you're remote, I actually expect you to be putting these together in some way for you that is not just having all the access to the PowerPoints on the iLearn files. So you need to be copying these in a notebook, retyping them somewhere, printing them out and putting them in a file somehow. Like, you need to do some work with organizing these, because if you're not physically interacting with these notes, they're going to be really hard to remember, and it's a lot. So the remote learning thing is kind of like makes this part of it more difficult. Okay. So what I would suggest is that you treat this just like you're in the room with me. You have a notebook, you're going to write your notes down. Because I'm also going to go through them, and I am going to talk about some things that are not on the slides that you're going to want to know. All right. So you need to make sure you have a way to write those down, remember those, whatever that is. Okay. So when you set up your notes, you should set them up the same way that I do. So if I indent something, if I bullet point something, you should be doing that too. If I'm numbering or lettering it in a specific way, you should too. If I'm underlining it, you should too. Okay. So for all of our notes, you're going to see that they have like this, a heading. Okay. Obviously, I haven't changed this one for this year. I'm sorry. I will do that in the future. But I'm always going to ask you to have this heading at the beginning of your notes, so that when you're flipping back through them to study them or to do your reading guide, you can easily find what you're looking for, because the topic and the unit are going to be identified for you. So today we're talking about the scientific foundations. That's the unit that we're starting. So that's all your basic stuff, research methods, how do we look at data, all that kind of thing. So today we're going to be specifically looking at the kind of the history of how psychology developed and what it looks like a little bit now. Okay, so most of the things we talk about today, we're going to go more in depth on in future lessons, but this one's just kind of an overview for you. All right. Okay, so let's get started. So when we say psychology, that has a very specific meaning. It is the study of behavior, and it is the study of mental processes. So how does your memory work? How does your problem solving work? How do your emotions work? Okay, this is very specific. It's broad, but we don't look at why you might shiver and get cold after you eat. That's not the kind of thing we're looking at. We're looking at anything that has to do with your brain. All right. So within that, we first started thinking about this with the ancient Greeks. Socrates and Plato both believed that your mind is something separate from your body. So you are not your body, you're your mind. And that your knowledge is, you're born with it, right? So you either are smart or you're not smart. They didn't really have you could get better at something. So after them came Aristotle. He was a student of Plato. He believed the opposite. He believed that knowledge is not something you're born with. It grows from your experiences. You can learn, you can expand. So when you're done copying these, we're going to do a timeline of major events in psychology's history. So you can set that up however you want. If you want to bullet point stuff, that's great. If you want to actually do a timeline, that's great. That's what I did. So first, we're going to look at the 1870s. And that's just really when psychology starts becoming a thing, right? Before that, it was here and there. We were talking about your brain in the context of religion. It wasn't really focused And the 1870s is when it kind of starts to become a specific focused thing that people are studying. And in 1879, this dude named Wilhelm Wundt creates the first actual laboratory to study psychological stuff. So before this, people were kind of, looking anecdotally, they were maybe figuring stuff out. He set up the very first lab with tightly controlled experiments. Okay. And then after that, in the 1880s and 1890s, you saw labs come up all over North America. So people started to copy him. And the main branches of psychology during that time were three. The first was structuralism. So this was looking at how the structure of your actual brain, the pieces of your brain. Functionalism, which is looking at what those pieces do. And introspection, which is basically like reflecting on your own mental processes and your own behavior. So then in 1900, we have this guy named Freud who comes along. You might know him, you might not. He's super famous in the psychology world. And he develops this theory called the psychoanalytic theory. And he's like the head honcho for a long time. And when we get to him, you're going to realize that maybe he wasn't so right about some stuff, but he was kind of like the big honcho at this time. And then about 10, 15 years later, this dude named John Watson comes and he starts to found a school of psychology called behavioralism. And that's really just looking at behavior and then trying to figure out why that behavior happened. So, did you do this specific thing when your little sister cried? Okay, then how did you learn to do that thing? Why is that the behavior that you did? That's what he was looking at. Okay. So these schools, behavioralism, functionalism, structuralism, they kind of just stay from the 1800s and the early part of the 1900s. And then in the 1950s, we get this new school called humanism. And really what this is we just are treating everybody like the people they are, right? This school really focuses on the fact that we can learn from our mistakes, we can grow, we can change, and it's kind of giving people the benefit of the doubt. Also in the 1950s, we have a bunch of other specific types of psychology emerge. So when we were talking about structuralism and functionalism and those kind of things, those are like big umbrellas in psychology, right? These ones that you're seeing on the screen here are narrowing down and only studying specific aspects. So these are what we're studying. Functionalism and structuralism are kind of like how we're doing it. Okay. So in the 50s, we start to see cognitive psychology emerge. So that's where we're looking at like the actual thinking that your brain does. So memory, problem solving, that kind of thing, logic, space, math problems, all of that. We also start looking at biological psychology, which is we're looking at basically everything that happens in your body that influences your behavior. So how do your genes influence your behavior? How do the connections that you have in your brain influence them? That kind of stuff. We also start to see evolutionary psychology. So that's when we're looking at our behaviors through the lens of like, okay, well, how could this behavior have served us when we were all living in caves and didn't have fire? Okay, so it's looking at our current behaviors through the lens of the past.